3 months ago, my girlfriend and I decided to take a weekend getaway to a cabin in the woods. We both needed a break from our hectic schedules, and the idea of a secluded retreat sounded pretty good at the time. The drive up there was peaceful, the scenery was beautiful, and the cabin was everything we had hoped for. It was a bit small, but at least it was still cozy. Surprisingly, this was the only house in the forest. That meant that we wouldn't have to deal with running into anyone for that matter. During the first night, everything went great. We cooked dinner, sat by the fire, and enjoyed the quiet. But on the second night, things started to get a little weird. We were sitting on the porch, looking at the stars, when we heard a distant scream not too far. It sounded like a woman. At first, we thought it might have just been an animal, but it was too human-like at the same time. We looked at each other, feeling uneasy, but ended up continuing what we were doing. Maybe it was just our imagination. As we were getting ready for bed, we heard what had been footsteps outside. Heavy, deliberate footsteps, like someone was walking around the cabin. I peered out the window, but saw nothing. At this, my girlfriend was starting to get really scared, so I tried to reassure her. "It's probably just a deer or something," I said, even though I wasn't too sure myself. We decided to lock all the doors and windows just to be safe. A little while later, we heard a loud bang on the front door, followed by a man's voice. "Open up!" he shouted. "I need help!" I could feel my adrenaline at this point. I told my girlfriend to stay quiet and called 911. The operator told me that they'd have someone come over, but because we were so remote, it would take a while before they got here. The man kept banging on the door, getting more and more agitated. "I know you're in there," he yelled. "I can see you." That's when I noticed a shadow moving around the side of the cabin. He wasn't alone. There were at least 2 of them that I saw. We grabbed a couple of kitchen knives for protection and ran to the bedroom, barricading the door with a dresser. We could hear them trying to break in, the sound of glass shattering and the front door being kicked. My poor girlfriend was crying and I was terrified, but I knew I had to stay calm for her. Minutes felt like hours. Then suddenly, everything went quiet. No more banging, no more shouting, just silence. We stayed in the bedroom, too scared to move. Soon enough, we heard sirens in the distance. The police had finally arrived. The officers searched the area and found signs of forced entry, but the men we saw were gone. They told us there had been reports of a couple of fugitives in the area, and it looked like they had chosen our cabin as a hideout. We were lucky they didn't get in. That night, we were escorted to a nearby motel. The next day, we cut our trip short and decided to just head home. The peaceful getaway we had hoped for turned out to be one of the most terrifying experiences of our lives. Now, whenever we think about planning a trip, we're definitely a lot more cautious. The thought of being alone in a remote place isn't as appealing as it once was. It makes me wonder, what if they had gotten inside? I'm glad to have never found out. A few years ago, my friends and I decided to go on a hiking trip in the Appalachian Mountains. We'd all been working hard and needed a break, so we thought a weekend in nature would be the perfect escape. We planned a route that took us deep into the forest and far from any signs of people, you can say. The first day was very fun. The weather was perfect, the scenery was breathtaking, and we enjoyed the tranquility that only comes from being surrounded by nature. We decided to set up camp by a small, crystal-clear stream, ate dinner over a campfire, and spent the evening looking at the stars above us. The next morning, we packed up and began to continue on our hike. As we went deeper into the forest, we noticed that the trail was becoming less distinct. I wasn't sure if we had gone left or right. It was a bit confusing. It wasn't marked as well as we'd expected, and we found ourselves constantly checking our map to make sure we were on the right trail. By late afternoon, we realized we were lost. The trail had disappeared completely, and the dense forest made it difficult to get our bearings. We were too exhausted at this point, so we decided to just set up camp and find our way back in the morning. That night, we didn't sleep well. Every rustle in the bushes and every snap of a twig had us looking at each other's shoulders. The following day, we packed up and tried to retrace our steps, but the more we walked, the more lost we became. Tensions were high at this point, and we started arguing about which direction to go. After hours of wandering, we stumbled upon an old, overgrown logging road. We were relieved because we thought it would have led us back. As we followed the road, we came across an old cabin. It looked like it had been empty for years, but we decided to check it out, hoping to find something useful. When we went inside, the cabin was completely in despair. Broken furniture, shattered windows, and graffiti covered the walls. It was clear that no one had been there in a long time. You would think a cabin meant safety and a sense of security, but this one was completely the opposite. We decided to rest for a bit before continuing on. While we were sitting in the cabin, we heard footsteps outside. At first, we thought it was another hiker, but when we looked out the window, we saw a man standing at the edge of the clearing. He was watching us, his face partially obscured by the shadows. "Hey, are you lost too?" I called out. The man didn't respond. He just stood there, staring at us. Something about him made my skin crawl. "Yo, we should go," my friend whispered. We quickly gathered our things and left the cabin, trying to put some distance between us and the stranger. But as we walked down the road, we kept seeing him out of the corner of our eyes, always just far enough away that we couldn't get a good look at him. We picked up the pace, hoping to find our way back to the main trail, but the road seemed to stretch on forever, and the forest around us grew denser and darker. Eventually, we came to a fork in the road. We argued about which way to go, and in the end, we ended up splitting up, agreeing to meet back at the fork if we didn't find anything. My friend and I took the left path while the others went right. We walked for what felt like hours, but the forest seemed to close in around us. Just as we were about to turn back, we heard a scream. It was a blood-curdling sound that echoed through the trees. We ran back to the fork, hoping to find our friends. When we got there, we found one of them, covered in blood and barely conscious. He told us they had been attacked by the man who had been following us. He said the man had come out of nowhere, swinging a machete. They tried to fight him off, but he obviously had the advantage. We quickly bandaged our friend's wounds and started running down the road, hoping to find help. The man was still out there, and we didn't know if he was following us. We ran until we could barely breathe, only stopping when we stumbled upon a small ranger station. We banged on the door, screaming for help. A ranger opened the door, and we frantically explained what had happened. He called for backup and took us inside, where we finally felt safe. The police arrived soon after and went into the forest to search for our other friend and the attacker. They found our friend, alive but badly injured. They never found the man who attacked us. We later learned that several hikers had gone missing in that area over the years, and it was suspected that a dangerous individual was living in the forest, seeking for future hikers. That hiking trip changed all of us ever since. What was supposed to be a fun adventure turned into a getaway gone wrong. We were lucky to get out of there, but the memory of that man and the terror we felt still lurked. I'm lucky that I made it out safely. I still wonder what would have happened if that man was on our trail instead of the other. This happened a couple of years ago when I decided to rent a cabin in the woods for a weekend getaway. I needed some time to myself, away from the city and all the noise. The cabin was pretty secluded, surrounded by dense forest. It was the perfect escape, or so I thought. When I got there, I spent most of my time just hiking, reading, and just enjoying the quiet. As night fell, I ate a sandwich that I had packed before coming and settled in with a book by the fireplace. The cabin was cozy, but as the hours passed, I started to feel a bit uneasy, but more so tired. It was probably just the isolation getting to me, I thought. Around 1 o'clock, I decided to call it a night. I locked all the doors and windows, then crawled under the covers and lay down. Of course, the cabin was silent, but it was silent in a weird way. I couldn't explain it. It was the kind of silence that made you hyper-aware of every little sound. Later on, I was just starting to drift off when I heard it, faint footsteps outside the cabin. At first, I thought it might be an animal like a coyote or deer, but the footsteps were too deliberate. They moved slowly in a circular motion. My heart started to race. I stayed perfectly still while trying to listen. Then all of a sudden, footsteps stopped near one of the windows, and I could hear a faint tapping on the glass. When I heard that tapping, my adrenaline kicked in. I got out of bed as quietly as I could and grabbed the flashlight from my nightstand. I crept over to the window and shone the light outside, but saw nothing. The tapping had stopped. I took a deep breath and tried to calm myself down. Maybe it was just a tree branch, I thought. I wasn't one to get scared easily, but something about tonight just made me feel so self-aware of every little noise I encountered. I went back to bed, but falling asleep was pretty hard. About an hour later, I started hearing the footsteps again. But this time, they were louder and more insistent. They stopped right outside the front door. I swore I heard someone or something breathing heavily as if they were right on the other side. At this point, my heart was pounding like crazy, and I debated calling the police, but I realized that I didn't have any cell service. I felt trapped, completely alone. Suddenly, there was a loud bang on the door, followed by a voice. "I know you're in there. Open up." I froze. I thought to myself, who else would be here this late? Another camper? There was no way because I already rented it for the night. The voice was low, gruff, and definitely not friendly. I grabbed a kitchen knife and stood by the door, trying to think of what to do. The banging continued, more insistent. "Open the door, now," the voice demanded. I decided to try and scare them off. "I have a gun," I shouted, hoping it would be enough to make them leave. There was a moment of silence, then the voice responded, "You're lying." The banging on the door stopped, and I heard footsteps moving around the cabin again. I took the opportunity to quietly move to the back door. I slowly unlocked it and slipped outside, keeping low to the ground. I needed to get to my car, which was parked about 50 yards away. It was a far distance, but I didn't care at this point. My fight-or-flight response was already kicking in. I crept through the darkness, my heart pounding in my ears. I could hear the person still moving around the cabin, muttering to themselves. I made it to my car, unlocked it as quietly as possible, and slipped inside. I locked the doors and started the engine, praying it wouldn't be too loud. The headlights illuminated the figure standing by the cabin. It was a man, dressed in ragged clothes, and his face was hidden in the shadows. He turned towards the car, and I hit the gas, speeding down the dirt road as fast as I could. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest town. I found a gas station that was still open and called the police. They took my statement and said that they would check it out, but I never heard back from them ever since. I don't know who that man was or what his intentions were, but I knew I didn't want to find out. Ever since then, that experience left me shaken. I haven't been back to that cabin, or any cabin in the woods, since. If you ever find yourself alone in a remote place, I have one piece of advice. Don't be alone.